This morning's scripture reading comes from what is probably an unknown story in 2 Kings, the 4th chapter. I'll be reading just the opening lines of that story, so listen now to this word. One day, Elisha, he was a prophet, was passing through Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived who urged him to have a meal. So whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for a meal. She said to her husband, "Look, I am sure that this man who regularly passes our way is a holy man of God. Let us make a small roof chamber with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that he can stay there whenever he comes to us." One day when he came there, he went up to the chamber and lay down there. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I hope that you will go back and read the rest of the story. It's a fascinating story, really. But in 2015, the senior staff took on the task of coming up with a strategic plan for the church, for the life of the church. And some of you understand that coming up with a strategic plan is not exactly an easy task. It's not something you do in one sitting. So we used the book, The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, and we worked through coming up with a strategic plan that was for that year, and we've done this every year since then, for the past 2 years. But one of the things that Lencioni required before we even got to the strategic planning was for us as a senior staff to come up with the values that we could identify as a church staff. And so we sat about and started talking about what those values were. These were not the values we hoped to have or the values we thought we have. These were actually things that we had to talk about and identify as the current practiced values in the life of the church and in the congregation. One of them was actually not that difficult to come up with, and it was the value of hospitality. And I still, at that point, could bear witness to the fact that this was a place where I experienced, and my family experienced, great hospitality as I came and took my appointment here just a few years earlier. I had not only been welcomed into the church and onto the staff, but my whole family had really been welcomed into the life and ministry of this church. And so it was a wonderful experience for us. Our hope as a staff then included the idea that we had people in our congregation who also practiced great hospitality, who were welcoming and open to the stranger who came through the door. And it's something that we will continue to work on, not only as a staff, but as a congregation, because we believe that hospitality is something that can always be improved upon. And so hospitality is not only a value we have, but it's actually part of our strategic plan. So what exactly then is hospitality? Dictionary.com has a great definition for hospitality. It is the friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors, or strangers. And that's actually a pretty good definition of hospitality. It's friendly, it's generous, it includes a whole group of people. But is it enough? Is that definition enough? I think after reading just those few verses from 2 Kings this morning, we need to expand our understanding of what hospitality actually is. You see, hospitality is more than just friendly and generous toward a stranger or somebody that we know. In fact, the reading this morning tells us that hospitality is actually sacrificial. It's the giving up of something for the sake of someone else. Whether it is a meal or a smile or a room in our home, hospitality is more than just friendly and generous, it's sacrificial. And it's also a way for us to receive something from the other person or persons who are coming into our lives. Hospitality includes our recognition that the other who we bring in, who we make a space for, actually has something to offer to us. Now, it might be difficult for us, especially in this day and age, to understand what hospitality in the ancient Near East looked like. Hospitality was almost always given to total strangers that were passing through town. Those people could be friendly, they could come bearing gifts, or they could be your enemies, people who were passing through that needed a place to stay that you wouldn't really want to invite into your home. But because travel was dangerous and often filled with its own set of problems, the expectation for anybody was that if someone knocked on your door, you let them in. And you shared with them whatever you had, no matter how meager or how abundant your life was at that time. It was really about mutual survival. But it was really, I think, as I read about all the stories in the scripture where people opened their homes and their lives to others that were passing through, I think it was even more than that. You see, hospitality transcended the differences between human beings, and it allowed a space in people's hearts to be open and welcoming to the strangers among them. It was really about the common good more than it was about just simply a place to sleep or a meal to eat. This Shunammite woman who we hear about today actually does all of the things that the definition of hospitality would require of her. She was generous and friendly. But the scripture tells us that she was wealthy. And so perhaps we can think, well, she was wealthy and she had the means to entertain this stranger that was walking back and forth. But the Hebrew word for wealthy is much more than material wealth. It has to do with the fact that she is independent, she is pious, and she is powerful. See, this Shunammite woman actually breaks all the rules of her current culture, the culture that she lives in. The culture that would say that as a woman, she needed to be totally dependent, irrational, and weak. She is the one who takes the initiative when she observes this man walking back and forth to invite him into her and her husband's home and serve him a meal. And she is the one who takes the initiative to have a room built for him so that he might have a space that is peaceful, welcoming, comfortable, and prayerful. This is not an elaborate space that she offers to him. Instead, it's simply a place where he can come and be in fellowship with God and with the people of God. It is, in fact, enough. She opens a space for the stranger. She gives and she receives. The fact is, in this text, what's really going on is that the power of God's grace allows this unnamed woman to be a source of hope and rest for this man as he comes and goes back and forth from who knows where to who knows where. The scripture never alludes to where he is going. We just know he's going. And in those moments where she opens up her home to him, her life and his life are transformed. And we know that the only thing that has the power to transform life is love. And in particular, the love that God has for God's people. And it's in that power, the power that love has, that not only are their lives transformed, but the lives, I'm sure, of the other people in that community who bear witness to what she is doing. Just this week, I was listening to a podcast that included an interview with David Brooks. Now, many of you read David Brooks. He's a New York Times columnist. Many people on the staff read David Brooks, and at the very least, I know a lot of you have read his book, The Road to Character. It's a fabulous book, and I don't recommend a lot of books, but that is a fabulous book if you haven't read it yet. In this interview, he tells a story about friends of his that live in Washington, D.C. Their names are David and Kathy. And he said that David and Kathy have a son that's in public schools, in the public school in D.C. And they know that he has a friend who really had no home life. in the midst of hearing about this story, they decided that this young man needed a home. His father had left years ago. His mother had health issues, and she was addicted. And so they invited this young boy to stay in their home with them, and he lives there. While at dinner one night, this young man tells David and Kathy about a friend of his who really doesn't have a good home life. Now, I want you to think about where this story's going to go, right? So this kid starts coming over for dinner every night. Who knows a kid who has a really miserable home life, and who knows a kid who knows a kid? Before you know it, David Brooks says that there are 10 to 15, 18 to 22-year-olds sitting around the dinner table in David and Kathy's home every single day. He goes there on Mondays and Thursdays every week. He tries never to miss that dinner time. He said that those kids sit around that table and they laugh and they talk and they share a meal. One young woman said to David Brooks one day that this was the first time she had sat at a dinner table in fellowship with other people since she believes she was 11 years old the last time that happened. 10 years had gone by since she had sat at a dinner table and fellowshipped. If you don't know the power of the dinner table, then you have missed a gift beyond explanation. There is healing and joy and power sitting and breaking bread with people. Brooks goes on to say that these kids come to this home because they are loved and accepted for who they are. They are allowed to share their gifts. And the adults that are there with them simply allow them to be who they are and share their stories. They're given respect and dignity, but most importantly, they are shown love. And we know that love ultimately is the thing that turns someone's life around. Love in a relationship that is mutual, where you receive hospitality and you give hospitality to those who are in your midst, has the power to transform the life of a broken heart, the life of a broken person. It has the power to change the trajectory of a life. Brooks closes by noting that David and Kathy in this home, in their own home, are called Mom and Dad by all of the kids who come into their house. Opening our door to the stranger is both beautiful and dangerous. But the lives that can be transformed in those moments are simply an act of God's grace. You know, and I know that ultimately only God has the power to transform a life. Only love that is sacrificial has the power to transform a life. And as the scripture tells us, we love, we show hospitality because God first loved us and showed us hospitality. The problem children were given a space at God's table. And our lives, because of that, have been transformed. So ultimately, hospitality is our response to God's grace, God's hospitality. Remember, it was God that took on flesh and blood and came to the earth to live and move and have his being among us, to show us what it means to love one another. So as God would have it, and I attribute all of this to God, as God would have it, this week, I met God on Facebook. What are the chances of meeting God on a Facebook post? I never expect to find God there. But a friend of mine tagged me in a post that he had read during the week. It's actually part of a bulletin, a church bulletin from Coventry Cathedral. Now, I believe that this cathedral is in England. I didn't do a lot of work, but I'm making that assumption because of some of the ways the words were spelled in this. It is the invitation to the Eucharist, to communion in their church. I hope you meet God in these words, as I did when I was reading them. We extend a special welcome to those who are single, married, divorced, widowed, gay, confused, filthy rich, comfortable, or dirt poor. We extend a special welcome to wailing babies and excited toddlers. We welcome you whether you can sing like Pavarotti or just growl quietly to yourself. You're welcome here if you're just browsing, just woken up, or just got out of prison. We don't care if you're more Christian than the Archbishop of Canterbury or haven't been to church since Christmas 10 years ago. We extend a special welcome to those who are over 60 but not grown up yet, and to teenagers who are growing up too fast. We welcome Keep Fit moms, football dads, starving artists, tree huggers, latte sippers, vegetarians, junk food eaters. We welcome those who are in recovery or still addicted. We welcome you if you're having problems, are down in the dumps, or just don't like organized religion. And in parentheses it says, we're not that keen on it either. We offer a welcome to those who think the earth is flat, work too hard, don't work, can't spell, or are here because Granny is visiting and wanted to come to the cathedral. We welcome those who are inked, pierced, both, or neither. We offer a special welcome to those who could use a prayer right now, had religion shoved down their throats as kids, or got lost in the city center and wound up here by mistake. We welcome pilgrims, tourists, seekers, doubters, and you. When we practice hospitality that welcomes all people, regardless of who they are, where they live, or what they've done, we welcome Christ in our midst. And the beauty and the danger of that is that we will probably have to sacrifice something, a belief and attitude, maybe something material. We will have to make space for the stranger who might be a friend or might be an enemy. But in that space, lives can be transformed. If we are willing to risk cultural norms for the sake of hospitality, then like that Shunammite woman, we can get off the beaten path of what is expected and start to actually live into the holy path that God has prepared for us, that allows us to live in a world filled with peace and love and forgiveness and reconciliation. Hospitality opens up the possibility that the abundant life that Christ has offered to his disciples is available to all people in all places at all times. The power of hospitality is the transformational power that God has for us. And I would venture to say that if we open our churches and our homes and our hearts to the stranger that comes into our space, we might just catch a glimpse of Jesus as he welcomes us to his table this morning.